and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen Bennett, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hello, everyone.
Now, we've got an exciting week this week, haven't we, Dennis? Because we're down
Well,
at the spring conference.
indeed, in Birmingham, in a prestigious venue. I really struggled, as I said the other day, Helen, to choose the uh, parts of the course. There was so much to choose from.
Yes, there is.
And I've gone for section A, and I know program A, and I know you're annoyed because you wanted to do some of those things. But tough, I made my choices first. So
You
there.
did. Fair play to you. I'm really excited about the junior course. There's a bespoke
Yes,
junior course as well. And we've been in a fortunate position this year to be able to give a number of bursaries. So that's looking really like a fantastic opportunity for lots of new, bright young lawyers to meet together and forge those kinds of relationships that, frankly, are going to last their
indeed.
entire career, aren't they?
Well, let's put it like this. Everyone knows who's been in the past how such a great feature of these conferences is the networking,
Yeah.
and it is about establishing new friendships, the opportunity to chat and discuss issues. It's not just pure work. You will meet people who are very helpful to you down there, who will help in the future. There's so
Yeah.
much going on, a lot to choose from, and as I say, I really struggled with making those choices.
Well, we're going to be doing a bespoke vlog next week following the
Yep.
conference. So we'll be able to give listeners the roundup of all the exciting content.
Yes.
Who knows? Maybe a little bit of gossip, Dennis. We don't know.
Hot off the press.
Yeah, hot
Yeah.
off the press. So
Sorry.
let's start
Great.
with our first item of the day. I think we're going to be looking at neighbourhood guarantees, I think. Is that what's coming up, Dennis?
Yes, our first item is on this new policy initiative concerning a neighbourhood guarantee. Meaningful devolution backed by sufficient and sustainable funding for councils is key to giving communities greater control over local priorities. So said the Local Government Association in its response to the government's proposal for a neighbourhood guarantee that sets clear expectations around the level of public services communities should expect to see.
Yeah, I took a look at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government's comments on this, and what they've said is that the neighbourhood guarantee would cover issues such as cleaner streets, filled in potholes, we've heard a lot about those lately, and other vital public services communities rely on. That they're not outlined particularly, but it added that local leaders would be asked to work closely with central government to meet these expectations and deliver real, tangible change people can see and feel.
Indeed, and people will be able to monitor whether the guarantee is being met in their area through new published data on the Local Outcomes Framework platform. The Ministry also highlighted new community power pilots that will see councils, community groups, and residents co-design local services, quote, so everyone has a voice in tackling the issues affecting them.
That's interesting, that data on the local outcomes framework platform, because that sounds very familiar to
It does.
previous efforts. And we know that there was huge problems with the statistical interpretation of that
Hmm.
data. So but it's also promised to crack down on profiteering by private companies providing services to councils, particularly those supporting vulnerable children in care. And of course, you and I, Dennis, have previously reported about new provisions in Wales, which is
We
going
have.
to prohibit utilising private companies. But of course, you need the resource to replace that. But I think they're also
Yes.
going to look at action to tackle the proliferation of vape shops and gambling premises on the high streets. Now, Secretary Steve Reed, he's the community secretary, he said in response that people want to live in neighbourhoods where streets are clean and safe, the high street is vibrant, and core public services are available. Yes, we do, but too often this isn't what happens, he says.
Indeed, and quoting again, he says the government's new neighbourhood guarantee sets minimum standards that local people can expect to see and hold public services to account. And if things don't improve, there are new powers to force change. Now that's entirely new, of course. And this is all about showing respect for the places people call home. Now, responding to the government's announcement, Councillor Louise Gittins, Local Government Association Chair, said, We have long called for action to address the unsustainable cost pressures in children's social care and greater powers for councils to shape thriving local communities.
She often has some interesting things to say, actually. Well, I think so. And Councillor Gittins also said that councils share the government's ambition to ensure vulnerable children receive the care and support they deserve while tackling excessive profiteering in parts of the children's placement market, which has, and we know, placed huge financial strain on local authorities. And, she made the point that meaningful devolution backed by sufficient and sustainable funding for councils, that's the key point, is necessary to give communities greater control over local priorities, from regenerating high streets to improving neighbourhood services.
And going on, she said, we are encouraged by the government's focus on neighbourhoods and place and will work with them to secure the additional funding that is needed. Local leaders, she said, know their places best, and with the right powers and resources, councils can deliver the change residents want to see.
Well, let's see how this working closely with central government manifests itself in this neighbourhood guarantee. And I think we also need to keep a watchful eye on that framework's outcome
Yes.
as well. But let's turn to news from Wales, Dennis, because we send out a bi-weekly Welsh bulletin, which we hope is very helpful to our Welsh members. Please let us know. We're always happy to take suggestions, aren't we?
Yeah, indeed we are, especially from local authorities, from the experience of our members in local authorities, and any stories that they have, please send them in.
We would love to have contributors. Yeah, absolutely. So recent developments across Wales have definitely highlighted a period of transition in governance. There's been some significant legislative activity and continued pressure on core local authority functions, I think it's fair to say. So there's been two notable acts which have been enacted. That's the Planning Wales Act 2026 and the Building Safety Wales Act 2026, which represent major additions to the Welsh legislative provision. The latter includes a comprehensive framework covering building safety in multi-residential properties, fire safety, very important in certain HMOs, strengthened enforcement powers, and mechanisms for remediation of defects.
Now, there are no new bills currently listed, and this reflects the immediate post-election period. So it's a sort of fallow time in that respect. But we have seen some interesting things over the coming months, sorry, over the recent months. And Wales has now entered into a new political phase following the Senedd elections. Wales has a new elected First Minister, and a ministerial team has now been appointed with an emphasis on professionalism, ambition, credibility, and empathy as they themselves set out at their first cabinet meeting.
Committee structures for the Seventh Senedd are still being established, actually, with substantive scrutiny work expected to begin in the autumn. Recent case law underscores ongoing pressures on local authority duties in Wales, particularly in social care, so very much like England in that regard. There's a case of BNF and Newport City Council, where the High Court found a breach of duties under the Social Services and Wellbeing Wales Act 2014 in failing to provide adequate care and support. But, we see that all the time in England as well.
Indeed, it reflects the English experience in many respects. Other notable decisions include well, there's a family division case addressing anonymity for professionals in care proceedings amid safety concerns, and there's a planning case criticising what was described as a blinkered fixation in decision making relating to a motocross track appeal.
And that's all, of course, linked in the bulletin. Now, the Public Services Ombudsman for Wales has reported its busiest year on record, with unprecedented volumes of complaints received and closed, indicating increased demand on public services and accountability processes. Again, same in England.
And similarly, Senedd research highlights continued concern around adult social care reform, and particularly on the question of whether Wales is equipped to meet escalating system pressures.
Well, the UK government has confirmed plans for an expanded and more clearly defined role for the Welsh government in youth justice reform, signalling further devolution-related developments.
And in licensing, enforcement activity remains robust, as demonstrated by a Newport premises license case. The license was suspended for 3 months following serious incidents involving disorder and safeguarding concerns, with additional conditions imposed as a result. Updated Welsh Government guidance has also been issued on taxi and private hire licensing, which strengthens expectations around safeguarding, equality and training standards, with further reforms anticipated post-election.
And planning decisions continue to generate local scrutiny, including approvals, certainly around tourism and infrastructure schemes, alongside refusals driven by flood risk considerations, reflecting, I would say, ongoing tensions between development and environmental constraints. So there's a little walkthrough of what's going
Yep.
on in Wales. Now, Dennis, the long-awaited code of practice relating to biological sex implications, although I have to say it covers other elements as well, has been laid in Parliament finally.
Indeed, it has. Single-sex toilets and changing rooms in England, Wales, and Scotland must exclude transgender men and women, according to a new code of practice from the Equalities Watchdog.
But the guidance also says that businesses and service providers have to offer what it calls practical alternatives, such as gender neutral toilets for people who do not wish to use services for their biological sex. Now, the Equality and Human Rights Commission document sets out how public bodies, businesses, and other service providers should respond in practical terms to April's 2025 landmark Supreme Court ruling, which we've discussed at length, that
Mm.
sex in the Equality Act refers only to biological sex.
And the guidance will be seen as an incremental victory for gender critical campaigners who have long argued that trans women specifically should be excluded from women only services. But critics fear it will consolidate a chilling effect as trans people avoid public places altogether. Trans advocacy groups had hoped that amendments made to the code by the EHRC in April, after feedback from the government, as well as consultation responses and extra legal advice, might have resulted in a less blanket exclusion.
Mm. Well, the guidance does suggest it is feasible for clubs and associations to remain trans inclusive by making themselves open to several protected characteristics at once. For example, women or men and trans people. But in healthcare, where mixed sex accommodation is not available, trans patients must be accommodated on the single sex ward that accords with their biological sex. But the code also states it would not be proportionate to exclude a trans man from obstetrics and gynecology outpatient services based on the objections of female patients.
The government's own equality impact assessment that accompanies the updated code acknowledges that the likely impact on transgender people is negative, but highlights mitigating factors like the ability of services to create third space provision. The guidance is clear that if a service provider admits a trans person to a service that aligns to their lived gender, that service can no longer be described as single sex, and the provider is very likely to be at risk of legal challenge.
Well, the chair of the EHRC, who's Mary Ann Stevenson, she said that the Supreme Court was very clear. If you're providing separate toilets for women and men, that has to be on the basis of biological sex. And Stevenson suggested that people had got, and I'm going to quote her, got caught up in a hyper focus on which toilets can trans women use.
And she said it would take a lot of the heat out, and we might be able to provide some solutions if we could take a bigger step back and say lots of us have different needs in terms of accessing toilets. She called for a wider conversation about how we make that work in practice, referring to services supporting women who are escaping violence, where a provider will often provide a variety of accommodation, including communal space and self-contained accommodation, which it might offer to women who have teenage sons, for example, or to trans women.
Well, many businesses have raised concerns, not and I suspect officers as well, that the required changes could undermine inclusion and be unworkable, for example, in hospitality, where venues differ drastically in terms of size, space, and age of buildings. So it's been laid in Parliament. So let's see, whether or not there's any proposed changes forthcoming, Dennis.
Indeed, indeed. I'm sure this will remain a controversial issue,
Yeah,
and we
absolutely.
will report on it, of course.
Now, let's move on because guidance delivering the children's social care reset has been released by the government and it sets out an implementation plan for local partners that also provide next steps for whole system reform of children's social care.
The document, Delivering the Children's Social Care Reset, sets out the government's implementation plan for reform of children's social care in England for the period 2026 to 29. It is framed as the operational delivery mechanism for earlier policy commitments, including the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Act 2026 and the wider reform agenda focused on improving outcomes for children and families.
So the plan identifies a whole system restructuring with an emphasis on earlier intervention, family preservation, and improved placement stability. And it positions children's social care as requiring coordinated action across local authorities and partner agencies, including health, education, and policing, and places responsibility on local systems to implement nationally defined reforms within a phased timetable.
A central strand concerns early help and family support. The document states that services will be reconfigured into a single family help model within each local authority area. Now, this integrates targeted early help and statutory child in need provision with the intention of intervening earlier to prevent escalation into care proceedings. The model is supported by multidisciplinary working and a stronger emphasis on relationship-based practice with families.
Well, a second core theme is the strengthening of family networks. The plan provides for systemic use of family group decision-making processes alongside a policy intention that wider family members should be engaged in care planning and decision-making. And it also introduces strengthened obligations in respect of kinship care, something I'm particularly interested in, including a requirement for local authorities to publish a local kinship offer supported by national standards.
The document further addresses care placements and market structure, and it sets out measures to increase fostering capacity and reform commissioning through mechanisms such as regional care cooperatives. The stated objective is to ensure that children in care are placed in stable, regulated and high-quality environments while addressing market inefficiencies and availability of placements. And it also signals a policy direction that residential care should be more limited and used for defined purposes within the overall system.
Now, adoption support, to get my words out, is identified as a separate reform stream, and the plan indicates continued development of adoption services and post-adoption support frameworks, although positioned alongside broader permanence planning reforms. I think another significant component relates to workforce development. The plan outlines actions to strengthen recruitment, training, and retention of social workers, so important, and of course, associated professionals. It includes measures to support early career development, reduce reliance on agency staff, and improve professional standards and practice frameworks across the sector.
The plan also introduces enhanced accountability and regulatory oversight. It references strengthened powers for Ofsted and a greater emphasis on data systems and performance monitoring to ensure compliance and to drive improvement. And this includes clearer expectations on local authorities and partner agencies in respect of safeguarding responsibilities and service delivery.
Yes, and the implementation is in structured phases. So the document includes some base level indicative timelines for primary legislation commencement, secondary legislation guidance and consultation activities. So these staged arrangements are intended to align statutory changes with operational delivery and local system readiness. Now, it is, of course, linked in the bulletin, as are all of these items. It's a big document, but it's very important if you work in this sector. So please do take the time to try and go through it. Now, let's move on. And data protection. It's back in the news, Dennis. It's never not out, I don't think.
It is indeed, and here's something to watch out for, because from the 19th of June, under an amendment to the Data Protection Act introduced by the Data Use and Access Act, organisations must now have a clear process for handling data protection complaints. In practice, many organisations will be able to adapt an existing complaints procedure rather than create a separate standalone process, provided it is suitable, accessible and clearly signposted to individuals. And I'd like to express credit and thanks to Ben Pumphrey at Anthony Collins for his blog on this topic, on which this item is based.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ben. Now, data controllers must make it clear how individuals can raise a data protection complaint. For many controllers, this can be achieved by adapting an existing public-facing complaints process rather than creating a separate process from scratch. The key point is to review the current policy and procedure to make sure they properly cover data protection complaints.
Now, although the legislation does not prescribe a single format, the safest approach is to include clear information in your privacy notice and in responses to data subject rights requests. The Information Commissioner's Officer expects organisations to make complaints information easy to find and easy to use. So, who can make a complaint? Both adults and children can make a data protection complaint. Whether the complaint is made by or on behalf of a child, you will need to consider, of course, whether the child is competent to make the complaint, in the same way as you may assess competence for a data subject access request.
Well, if the child is not competent, a parent can usually make the complaint on the child's behalf. Parent or care or designated carer, I think we should say. If the child is competent, the controller should seek confirmation from the child before treating the complaint as having been validly made on their behalf by a parent. Guardian is the word I was looking for, Dennis,
Yes.
earlier. Thank you.
Yeah. So the next item on this is, what do you do when you receive a complaint? Well, under the requirements, data controllers must acknowledge receipt of a data protection complaint within 30 days. If the 30th day happens to fall on a weekend or bank holiday, the deadline moves to the next working day. The ICO confirms this is a core requirement of the new process.
When sending the acknowledgement, the controller can ask for further information if it reasonably needs to verify the complainant's identity or their authority to act for someone else, for example, under a power of attorney. If the complaint is made on behalf of another person, the controller does not need to investigate it until it's satisfied that the complainant is authorised to act.
Now, let's look further at this question of investigating the complaint. You must investigate the complaint without undue delay, and what amounts to undue delay will depend on the circumstances, so it's important to be able to explain the time taken if the matter is later challenged by the complainant or by the ICO.
And as a matter of good practice, controllers should keep complainants updated on progress, including likely timescales and any delays. And this aligns with the expectations set out by the ICO. And also, you're going to need to keep a clear written record of the complaint, the steps taken to investigate it, the outcome reached, and any remedial action, especially as there is a potential that the complainant may escalate their complaint to the ICO or, of course, to the courts.
And once the investigation is complete, you should tell the complainant the outcome without undue delay as well, and explain any remedial steps you have taken in response to the complaint. And you should also be ready to provide the ICO with details of the complaint, the investigation carried out, and of course, the outcome.
So what should you have done by the 19th of June? Well, you definitely need to review your existing complaints procedure to ensure it covers data protection complaints, update your privacy notice and data rights response templates to explain how complaints can be made.
And make sure staff can recognise a data protection complaint and know where to direct it. And finally, keep a clear record of the complaint, the investigation and the outcome.
Sage advice, Dennis. And of course, many thanks to Anthony Collins again. Now for our final item of this edition, and we're going to turn to my all-time favourite resource. As we know by now, it's the House of Commons Library. I love it, Dennis. Honestly, I cannot champion it enough. People want to go. It's so thorough, so good, so well researched. So yeah, do look at the House of Commons Library. This time it's a report on local government transparency in England.
Yes, Helen, very useful, as we always say, and this note provides details of the Code of Recommended Practice on Local Authority Data Transparency. It covers the Code of Recommended Practice, it covers filming and social media use in council meetings, and pay policy statements.
Yeah, that's sometimes forgotten, isn't it?
It's all part of the same picture.
Yeah, now, Dennis, this will be familiar to a number of our listeners, of course, but for juniors or those new to local government, it's a little gem. It really
Mm.
is. And I would urge listeners to take a look at it. So let's walk through what it says briefly, of course. The main point here is that transparency is not derived from a single legislative source, but essentially from a composite framework. And this includes statutory rights of access to meetings, freedom of information obligations, and a range of codes issued under statutory powers. And the effect, basically, is a layered regime in which formal legal duties sit alongside instruments that shape compliance and expectation.
And in particular, as we mentioned, the briefing highlights the Code of Recommended Practice on Local Authority Data Transparency as a key driver of proactive disclosure. This code establishes expectations that authorities must publish specific data sets relating to expenditure, procurement, assets, and senior staffing. And it also reflects a broader policy position that information held by public authorities should generally be accessible unless there are legitimate reasons for restriction, such as confidentiality or safeguarding considerations.
Mm. And alongside proactive disclosure, the Freedom of Information framework remains central. So, the requirement for publication schemes approved by the Information Commissioner obliges authorities to make classes of information routinely available, including governance documents, financial data, and decision making records. And of course, don't forget, the more you publish, the less FOIs you're going to get
Yes.
because it's already there. So but in any event, for practitioners, this reinforces the need to maintain systems that ensure both reactive disclosure and structured proactive publication.
The briefing also addresses transparency in local authority decision-making processes. It refers to the established rights of public access to council meetings and documents, and these rights are supplemented by more recent measures permitting filming and social media reporting of meetings, which alter both the practical management of meetings and the handling of confidential or exempt information.
Now, another component concerns the Code of Recommended Practice on Local Authority Publicity. And this code governs how authorities communicate with the public, seeking to ensure that publicly funded communications are objective, proportionate, and importantly, politically impartial. So, obviously, for legal teams, the code frequently arises in the context of the pre-election period and challenges relating to things like misuse of resources or, in fact, perceived bias as well.
Indeed. And the briefing also highlights pay transparency requirements. We often forget about those in this context.
Yep.
Local authorities must publish annual pay policy statements setting out remuneration for senior officers and the pay multiple within the organisation. And these obligations are intended to support accountability in relation to senior pay and workforce structures, but also carry significant reputational and governance implications.
Yeah, so transparency really is a consistent thread. It's the balance between openness and lawful constraints. So while transparency is framed as essential, and it is to democratic accountability and public trust, the regime does recognise limits, including data protection, commercial confidentiality, and of course, very importantly, the safeguarding of vulnerable individuals and children. And
Mm.
this creates an ongoing need for careful legal judgment in disclosure decisions, which I'm sure many of our members will be all too familiar with.
Yes.
And on that note, that's it for another edition of the podcast. You can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 20, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too. Bye bye now.